Hi, I'm Sam from Candy Consulting. Welcome again to Sustain Talks, where I discuss the world of sustainability and CSR with interesting people that I come across on my journey. Today, I'm joined by Asif Din, Sustainability Director at Perkins&Will. Hello, Asif, how are you?
Not too bad, thank you, Sam.
Good, thank you for joining me today. Let's just get straight into it. If you can just give a brief introduction into who you are, how long you've been in sustainability, and a little bit about what your role entails.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I suppose, if you want to sort of start my sustainability journey, I suppose I started getting more and more interested in it while I was at university. I was lucky enough to go to Nottingham University, where Robert and Brenda Vale were, and they had quite a seminal book. It was called The Autonomous House. So what they did was they built a house and tried to make it sure that it just ran by itself. It wasn't plugged into anything, not even drinking water. It was using rainwater for their main drinking water supply. So from there, I found another university where I could learn something off of somebody, and then I joined Bill Dunster Architects, and I was actually employed to work on BEDZ, which it's still now, unfortunately, still a flagship sustainability development, even though it's good 20 years ago.
Wow.
So so I've been in the game for quite a long time. My role at Perkins&Will is to actually look at all of the projects and see how I can help the designers and also the clients explore all the sustainability opportunities.
Yeah.
Not all projects are the same. Not all projects are going to be super sustainable, but just trying to look for those potential opportunities and then just try to make sure that each one of those is ticked as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So are there any interesting projects that you're working on at the moment where you are sort of adding some sustainability value?
Well, yeah, sort of like at any one time, there's lots of different projects and all different scales. I'm working on a university building in the Middle East at the moment. I'm working on a hospital in Africa. Also quite a few corporate interiors in London and within the EU. And a couple of years back, I was actually working on a whole country master plan.
Oh,
so
wow.
doing sustainability for a whole country, which was, so it goes quite scarily in scale from, designing, essentially a new toilet all the way to a country. So it doesn't get bigger and smaller than that.
Where do you start with a new country?
Well, sort of like it is trying to sort of like classify what is actually needed in what area. And it's more about demand than anything else.
Yeah.
So it's actually splitting the country up into grids, sizable chunks.
Yeah.
That you can then have a meaningful conversation of, is this the right thing to put here or isn't it?
Yeah. So when you go into a new project, what's the first thing you do? Is it collecting data, or how do you start?
Actually, it's always a conversation. So it's always a conversation starting with the client and basically trying to understand what they actually want out of it, because best will in the world, sort of like we can say that, we can make your project super sustainable, whatever else. And they'll go, nah, not interested. So what I have to do is I have to find out what they're interested in, whether it's people, whether it's materials, whether it's energy. And then from that, I can effectively set them, sort of like, it's a strategic thing from me, effectively, that I'll just basically say, well, if you're interested in wellness, have you thought about control? Have you thought about passive measures? And they will bring a range of other sustainability benefits, which the client probably hasn't thought about because they're focused on what they actually want.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like broadening the field slightly for them.
Yeah, interesting. So with regard to your own self, what does sustainability and social responsibility mean to you?
Well, they're just like both, two almost poison type words, because everybody you ask will have a completely different answer to that.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of sustainability, I think sustainability, in matter of fact, maybe an old word now, maybe a word that actually should be started to be phased out, because sustainability was a term or a word that was coined really in the sort of like the 70s. and then it was brought into sort of like geopolitics, you know, sort of like worldwide politics within the 80s, within Rio and you know, sort of like Kyoto Protocol. And still at that stage, we could have saved it. You know, we could have effectively said, if we, you know, if we just live on a sustainable basis, if we had that ceiling, then in matter of fact, we could still make things better. If it's effectively, we had to stop and just think about the future. We're no longer in that situation. We are past that point. That tipping point happened. I don't know exactly what the exact date is, and I'm sure scientists will have a different date, but last year was the first time that effectively human activity surpassed natural activity on planet Earth.
Yeah.
So effectively, so what we should be looking for now is almost regenerative design.
Yeah.
We cannot be actually thinking about sustainable design anymore.
Yeah. So scary times, right?
Well, scary times, but you know, sort of like there is the means to still do it. You know, there is stuff happening every single day that you can see across industries that can actually help in that fight. And people are getting more and more of a handle on what that fight actually is now, because before it was something, all right, I don't really need to deal with this. I'll deal with this tomorrow.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we have to start dealing with it now.
Do you think then that we're going to get to net zero by the time that we need to, or what are your views on getting to net zero?
Well, net zero is effectively a get out clause anyway. It's not true zero in any sense of the word. It means that effectively you can, you know, sort of like offset. It's also what time frame you're talking about. In terms of buildings, most net zero classifications mean over a course of a year.
Yeah.
So say the energy that you produce in summer is going to be something that you'll have to use for the winter. And there's no way that you're going to be able to store that amount of energy over that time period. So the net zero energy is actually, you know, sort of like, it's not quite strong enough at the moment in some sorts of ways. But will all buildings become net zero? Probably, but it will require quite a lot of offsetting, quite a lot of, you know, sort of like dragging down effectively what the actual energy consumption of buildings actually are.
I guess some buildings, being as old as they are, going to be more difficult to, you know, it's probably easier to make changes to a new building than it is to an old building, right?
Swings and roundabouts. Some yes, some no. Quite honestly, there are some very, very hard to treat buildings that don't really have the capability. But equally, quite a lot of the new buildings that are built now have almost been built in a way that they will be hard to treat in the future. But if you have a blank sheet of paper, it's always easier. In matter of fact, to start quantifying what that energy consumption is, what that carbon load actually is on the building.
There's a couple of things, you know, we talked before, and there was a couple of things that you mentioned that I found really interesting and wanted to share with the listeners. And you talked about short-termism, which do you want to explain that a little bit more and what that means, what the effects are?
Well, sort of anybody effectively is only thinking about the goal that they want to achieve. And it seems to be, you know, and most of the time that is reasonably short-term. So for an architect, for a designer, they're interested in designing something and then effectively that building opening up or that refurbishment being used. And that's where they're pretty much their responsibility ends. And their responsibility shouldn't end there. They should actually be thinking about how it's going to be used day to day and what the design would look like in 10, 20, 30 years time, or whatever the lifespan of that building is that they put on it. There is a figure, you know, in the industry, in the construction industry, of 60 years. But that 60-year figure doesn't really have a basis. It's something that somebody said buildings should last for 60 years. We have loads of Victorian buildings that have been more than 60 years. But equally, we've had buildings from the 70s that have been torn down now. So we've got to be thinking more like, almost like cathedral thinking. So you have to be thinking about something beyond your lifespan. And that's the mindset as designers we have to start getting into.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I guess this year, you know, with the change of people from working from home and how buildings are changing, and I guess they're going to change so much over the next few years. What's been your biggest lesson over the last year and a half with the changes?
Well, the last year and a half has effectively taught us that we all can survive. You know, sort of like we're all able to adapt. And I think that is probably a lesson that we should move forwards in everything that we do. We should be designing for adaptability rather than basically saying it has one fixed use.
Yeah.
It's sort of like we're all, you know, sort of like working from home, spare bedrooms, you know, sort of like, who would have thought that, you know, sort of like we would be able to actually make this shift from sort of like complete physical work experience to a digital one.
Yeah.
And it's been, you know, it's been muted for so many years. It's been muted since probably the 1980s that, oh yeah, you won't have to, you know, fly anymore. You won't have to do this, but we can actually do it. And all right, we're not going to go back exactly the way we were. I don't believe that. And we're going to have this hybrid way. But, you know, this afternoon, I will have probably a meeting with somebody in South Africa. And tomorrow morning, I've got a meeting with somebody in Australia.
Yeah.
I couldn't physically do that before.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can get about a lot more, really.
Well, it's not about the getting about. It's basically being able to talk to other people. And being able to talk to other people means that you can exchange ideas. You can actually grow your own knowledge and grow their knowledge in some sorts of ways. That's the reason we need this sort of dialogue, and this has enabled all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think the biggest challenges that are going to come in sustainability?
The biggest challenge is sustainability that's going to be effectively the long tail. Effectively, there's going to be lots of things that are going to be easy to meet. We've had quite a few years of the low-hanging fruit that we can easily implement action. But we're going to come to a point probably in about 3 or 4 years' time where things are going to get a lot tougher. And people are going to have to make more tough decisions. Nothing as tough as COVID or anything, you know.
Yeah.
We're sort of like, we're still talking a minute amount. I think there was a report recently that effectively, if we spent sort of like a fraction of what we spent on COVID a year, we'd beat climate change. It wouldn't be a problem to us. Net zero wouldn't be a problem to us.
Yeah.
It's just that, you know, this is a one-off event, but it's something that needs to be invested for the long term.
So you think that the effects of the last year and a half are going to come at a much later date then? Or do you think it slowed it down a lot?
I don't think it's slowed it down. I think it's a blip more than anything else. We're going to go back to not exactly the same, but we're going to go to a reduced rate moving forward. And there's going to be that hybridization effectively of people probably using less energy, probably, you know, sort of like the work for home thing, you know, everybody's probably going to be working from home for a proportion of their week. Yeah. If they can. So it's sort of like there will be that sort of mix. There will be a reduction, but I don't know exactly how much that reduction would be. Yeah.
So, I mean, you've been in sustainability for a long time, and I guess that your views have often changed. But looking now, what do you think that people could do differently, like an immediate action where they could make a big difference?
Immediate action make a big difference. It depends completely on the individual, quite honestly. Yeah, sort of like, you know, I'm not going to sit here and preach to somebody, say, who lives in the countryside saying that you've got to give up your car, because you won't be able to. It's not feasible to. But if you live in a city and you have good connectivity, get rid of the car. Yeah. That's probably my number one, because I you know, sort of like, if you look at, say, the utilization factor of cars within a city with a good transport system around it, they're, you know, sort of like, they're just sitting assets that are huge lumps of metal, huge lumps of carbon that are just sat outside. Yeah, no, I totally get that. I mean, now I work from home, I hardly use my car, and actually downsize to, you know, because I'm just not using it enough, and near a station. So,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Who inspires you in sustainability? Who do you look out for and read? And
This is a difficult one because, you know, in the past I'd be able to reel off people that basically, yes, you should look at this person, they're real trends. There aren't. There's work coming around from so many different angles at the moment that it's really hard to say this person is a one person that you really have to look at.
yeah,
So, you know, I think 3XN effectively, you know,
yeah,
a Danish company, they are doing quite good work. But, you know, sort of like you look at some of their projects in, you know, sort of in architecture, and they're fantastic, the Circle House. And then other projects, you're thinking, well, does that have the same sort of message? And not really. So
yeah.
it's sort of, I think you have to be a magpie and you have
Okay.
to look around and you have to see what you can find, because you probably will find stuff in quite a lot of unlikely places.
Yeah, there is so much going on at the moment. It's definitely out there. And Asif, honestly, I learn from you each time we speak, and I will continue to follow you and your journey. And I do hope that we get to speak to again soon. Thank you so much for your time. I do
No problem.
appreciate it. I really enjoyed speaking to you. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye.